I used to be a bouncer at several different locations in the Toronto downtown area. I enjoyed working on the patio when I could, despite not being a smoker, because talking to people made time go by faster, and hey, easier to get phone numbers. There was this one place I worked at that always had crazy stuff happen. The patio was also a weak chain link fence with some tarp thrown over it. The club was cheap, so the fence didn't cover the entire area, so I had to be watchful of people trying to sneak in. One night, I felt lazy, so I stood in the opening with my back to the street. I was talking to some people trying to kill the time. I felt some guy stand behind, coming in from the street. This wasn't too unusual. Some people get turned away, and when they see me, try to bribe their way through the patio entrance. I was having none of it, so I puffed myself up, determined to ignore him until he gave up on me noticing him. After about 10 minutes of this, I started getting a bit creeped out, because the guy was just standing behind me, without saying or doing anything. I turned around to tell him to get lost, but stopped mid-sentence. The guy was a bit taller than me. I'm 6'2", kind of lanky, very well dressed. He was also covered from head to toe in blood, like completely drenched. I thought he'd been in an accident, so I dropped my tough guy act and started asking him if he was okay, needed an ambulance. He calmly responded, "No, he's good. He just wants to find his brothers." I said, "Are you sure your brothers are here?" He insists that they're here, as they told him they'd be in X city, not anywhere near Toronto, where the club's located. After his complete obliviousness to what city he's in, the fact he's soaked in blood, and his intense stare, the dude wasn't blinking. I called my boss up. When my boss appeared, I gave a quick rundown of what happened. He talked to the guy very briefly, and then told him he'd assist. He went and got some patrolling cops. When the cops appeared, one of them lightly touched the bloody guy on the shoulder. That's when he started screaming incoherently and tried slashing at him with a small knife he'd concealed in his pocket. The cops, my boss and I, subdued the guy until he could be cuffed and placed inside a cop car. The guy was screaming loudly and struggling to hulk out of the cuffs, as the cuffs cut deeply into his wrists the entire time. To this day, I still have no clue what the hell that was about. I was an emergency dispatcher for the police department in my city, working overnight, when a woman called in to say her depressed husband had gone missing. She said he sometimes likes to go to a local 1800s era cemetery and just be alone. We sent 2 officers out to look for him, and they saw the door to the mausoleum cracked open. When they went in, they made their way through the very dark underground rooms, and finally, one of their flashlights caught the image of a figure. They thought it was the man just standing there, but it turned out he was hanging from one of the pipes overhead, and was dead. The ceiling was so low to the ground that his feet were still on the floor. The officers hightailed it out and called back to say they'd found him. This was late October in Maine. Very spooky. When I was a young teenager, I had a commercial cleaning gig with my parents as the night shift guys. You know, the ones who come into your friendly neighbourhood takeout after the other guys close and really clean the place, kitchen, bathrooms and all. The restaurant was located in a fairly busy area of town in a mini-strip mall, so we weren't really concerned about security, since there was always a patrolling night guard riding around the parking lot to make sure there was no trouble. Well, this particular night, it was just myself and my mother, cleaning one of our nightly buildings by ourselves, while my pop and sister were doing the other one across town. Everything was going smoothly, until my mum realised she left our new box of washing powder. We used it for the kitchen floors, outside in the truck. Me being unfazed by the aspect of being alone outside at 1 AM in the morning, chose to go get it. And right when I was locking the door to the truck, and inching my way back inside. I noticed a guy standing across the parking lot, just staring at me. He wasn't moving or anything like that, just staring. It was creepy as hell, so I merely walked back inside and made sure the door was locked before continuing to do my business. When I moved out of the kitchen into the front dining area to begin mopping, that's when I noticed that Creeper Dude was now standing beneath the front door awning outside, staring in the glass, looking at me. Dude practically screamed homeless with his dishevelled clothes, long stringy hair, and thick wild beard. But honestly, it was his eyes that really freaked me out. I can only describe them as utterly soulless. Beginning to get a bit freaked out, but not wanting to be rude, I gave him a quick glance before going back to do my work. But before I could really do it, he started slowly and almost rhythmically pounding on the glass with his fists, still staring intently at me. At that point, I was pretty much done with trying to be patient with him, and promptly yelled at him to get lost. My mum heard me yelling from the kitchen, and came out to see what all the commotion was, and I told her while pointing at the man. The moment I did, though, I saw my mum blanch, and then slowly begin to back away. She grabbed my wrist and urged me to do the same, but wouldn't let me turn around to see what the hell was up. We reached the back stockroom of the restaurant and stayed there, while Mum called the strip security guard to let him know what was up. Later that evening, after the security guard came and checked the place, he said there was no sign of the guy. But there, at the front door of the restaurant, he found a discarded straight razor laying in the middle of the pavement, and another in the bushes at the place that he'd been pounding on the glass. My mum said that when I'd called her over and looked away, he grinned at the both of us and held up the knife to tap it against the glass. We no longer work nights, but still, whenever we do get the occasional call for a deep clean, I always have my own weapons with me just in case. I did my basic military training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. Our barracks were old, dating around the 1950s or 1960s. Every night, a number of recruits were assigned fire guard duty, which was essentially trying to stay awake for an hour and mopping the floors, or buffing it, until the next soldier came on duty. The fire guard post for my platoon was at one end of a long hallway, directly under a set of speakers suspended from the ceiling. Whenever the drill sergeants made an announcement, you'd hear them through the speakers. This is how they communicated réveil, or wake up, and other instructions where they had to talk to the whole building at once. Usually these were communicated in blistering shouts, rendered staticky and nearly unintelligible as they blared through the ancient sound system. One night, about halfway through basic, so sleep deprivation was really hitting hard by this point, I was sitting in a chair under the speakers, trying to stay awake. The speakers crackled to life, and I immediately perked up. Unusual for an announcement this time of night, but it wasn't outside the realm of possibility. The voice was soft, barely above a whisper. A woman's voice. "Private, get everyone outside, right now." The comm line remained open, a low hum hissing through. The voice again. "Right now, Private, everyone outside." Weird. Not that it was a woman's voice. It was a co-ed basic training, and we had a couple of female drills. But for it to come across so softly was very strange. When the brown rounds used the intercom, it was at full shouting voice. I headed down the length of the hall to where 2nd Platoon had a fire guard on duty, similarly situated. Asked him if he heard anything. Got a negative response. I made a decision. I'd chalk it up to my imagination and tiredness, and not risk having the entire barracks furious at me for disturbing their sleep in error. If it was one of the drill sergeants messing with me, and I got in trouble for not waking everyone up, at least I'd be the only one getting smoked. Nothing happened the rest of the night, and I put it out of my mind until the very end of basic, when we had our 3-day field training exercise. We made it through, and the drills started treating us like real humans, almost, again. As we completed the last day of the exercise, which was a near-live fire night scenario, we all gathered around the fire. The drills got to talking, then got to telling stories, and then got to telling ghost stories about the base. My drill, Parida, a male, told the story of the first female drill sergeant on Fort Leonard Wood. Can't remember when it was, 70s or 80s, but it was decades ago. Apparently she faced a lot of pressure and harassment, as you can imagine. It was unrelenting and harsh, and apparently she couldn't take it. She did it from some exposed water pipes, using her belt. A few years later, they plastered over the exposed pipes, so they could mount speakers there. Doing an overnight at a halfway house where I worked in college. Me and a colleague were in the office just BSing, when we see on the security cameras someone walking through the alley. Absconds and people taking off is pretty common, so I thought it was a resident taking off in the middle of the night. I tell her to stay in the office as I go out to the side door that leads to the alley the dude was coming in. Well, there's one camera facing down on way, and the other camera in the opposite direction. When I get outside, no one's there. I radio back to the girl, and she's telling me he has to be. She was watching him walk from one camera and didn't see him in the next, so thought he was under our cameras or something. There's nothing in the alley besides a few telephone poles, with buildings on each side. I lit a cigarette and tried listening, but nothing. There's nowhere he could have been. We watched cameras again, and sure as hell, everything is current of what we saw. We did a quick resident check, and everyone was accounted for, so I don't know who this mystery guy was, or where the hell he went. Used to work evenings at a movie theatre until late in the night. Usually we'd get off at 11, but some late night movies wouldn't end till 1 or 2 in the morning, so there were always cars in the parking lot, but a part of it would be open and illuminated by several street lights, so it'd be easy to see someone standing in that area. One night I got off work and was sitting on the steps to the theatre, looking off into the empty parking lot, waiting for a relative to pick me up. We were texting back and forth, and he told me to meet him at a nearby restaurant, as it'd be easier to leave its driveway than the movie theatre. I got up and began walking. Part of the way over to the edge of the parking lot, I heard some sort of ruffling or scraping noise. It just sounded simply like a shoe scraping along some gravel. I think it's just someone getting out of their car, but I never saw anyone pull up, and I'd been out there for some time. I turned around to see if I could help the person getting out, considering I was still in uniform. I figured it could be someone asking me to tell them the time of a movie ending and how much longer they needed. Spun around, and it's some dude crouched among rows of cars. As soon as I turned around, he started quickly walking towards me, all hunkered down. Never sprinted so fast in my life. Didn't recognise them or know their intentions, so I wasn't taking any chances. Used to work for a big name brand convenience store. I was fairly new to the night shift and the store. A lot of the people who had been there a while started telling me the store was haunted. Of course I didn't believe them. There was one story where one of the day crew refused to go into the cooler because a ghostly woman screamed at him, or the slushy machine would stop working randomly. Stuff like that. It's almost midnight. Time to lock up the beer case. My co-worker and assistant manager was outside smoking. I was the only person in the store. No employees or nothing. The case's keyhole was at the top. It was pretty old and was difficult to lock sometimes. I'm reaching up to it. I'm short, and I think I see something out the corner of my eye. There are other windows behind me, a few shopping rows back, but no one's outside, and no one's in the rows. I think I'm just imagining things, probably a moth or something. It's midsummer. We get June bugs and moths, lots of them. So I go back to the cooler and look up. Right in the mirror, plain as day, a man, about 5'9" to 6 foot, wearing a plaid shirt, a grey wife beater, short bowl-cut hair, standing literally one row behind me. I twist around. No one's there. I check rows. I even go outside and around the building. It's just me and my boss. I have no idea what I saw, but it was legit the scariest, creepiest thing to ever happen to me. Ghost or whatever. It was damn near insanity.